What's going on, everybody? Cheers. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to this week's episode of the With Her Two Hands podcast, where each week we celebrate the women who build, fix, and make the things that make the world go round with her own two hands. My name is Bogie, and I am your host. I am a master mechanic by trade, but I am passionate about encouraging women into all of the different industrial trades and helping see our numbers increase. Generally speaking, across the trades, across the United States, we make up less than 10%. And in some trades, it is as low as 1%. Automotive, we make up a mere 1.9% of all automotive technicians, but we are a mighty minority, if I do say so myself, and our numbers are definitely growing. This series, if you're new here, is truly all about celebrating these women who are kicking butt every day out in the field, where they are not the norm, where people still do not expect us to be doing the jobs that we do. And where often tradeswomen often do not have their stories shared, their light shown on them. They deserve to be celebrated, and that's what this series is all about. And today is no different. We have a fantastic guest lined up for you guys. She is waiting in the wings right now. She is an auto mechanic as well. She is also an engineer. And like myself, she is also incredibly passionate about empowering women through automotive knowledge and does a lot of automotive education. She does some really, really cool stuff. I think you guys are going to enjoy meeting her a ton. But really quickly, big thank you to our sponsor for this episode, DriveTime. If you're not familiar with them, make sure you go check them out, and the link's down below. They are a phenomenal company. They recondition and sell used cars on the surface, right? That's the bare minimum of what they do, the nuts and bolts of it, so to speak. But they do so much more. They create a ton of opportunities for people to get their foot in the door within the industry. They do a lot of training, and they really put their money where their mouth is when it comes to supporting the advancement of women and other minorities within the trades. And one of the ways that they do that, amongst the many, is through things like partnering with my shop, Girl Gang Garage, to do all-female builds and other educational opportunities, and this podcast. So we're very grateful to them for helping make this possible. So go show them some love and check them out. And most importantly, I'm grateful for every one of you for making this series possible and for coming back week after week. So with that, without further ado, I am going to bring on our guest for tonight, the lovely Miss Megan, or Meg, Dietrich. Hello, darling. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. You can tell already that I have the attention span of a flea, because like literally 3 seconds ago, I was like, do you prefer Meg or Megan? She's like, Meg, please. I'm like, okay. And then I promptly got it wrong. My apologies.
No worries.
So Meg, tell the folks at home just in a nutshell who you are, what you do, where you are, and then we'll dive into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. So my name is Meg. I am a mechanic by trade. Took a couple years, but I decided to go back and get my mechanical engineering degree. Had spent a couple years in racing before I took a sharp turn and end up at my current job in the corporate world as a design engineer, and more recently have started a newsletter and an Instagram account educating women about the basics of car maintenance, things automotive. I'm located in North Carolina, just north of Charlotte, near Race City, USA, and Mooresville.
Awesome. I love it. Okay, so I love a good career that takes lots of twists and turns, which yours definitely has. So I have so many questions. But let's go back in time. Let's start at the beginning. Did little baby young Meg always know that this is what you wanted to do?
I knew for a long time I wanted to work on cars. I had a fascination with them when I was younger, and I always wanted to learn about how things worked, and very specifically cars. So my rebellious streak kind of led me away from initially from the college route that my parents really wanted me to do. But, they were supportive. They said, well, you're happy doing, automotive things. I ended up taking an apprenticeship. I actually took a class in high school that got me an apprenticeship at a Chevy dealership. And so, yeah, it was kind of just always something I was fascinated by. And I literally remember having the thought at one point, if I'm going to be driving a car for the rest of my life, I might as well know how to work on it.
I love kid logic. It's my favorite. Were you exposed to it a lot, or was this like totally like just something that came from inside you out of nowhere and everybody was like, we don't know where she came from, but
Yeah, that was essentially it. Yeah, I wasn't, both my parents were Air Force. My mom got out early and, raised 4 kids, and my dad stayed in the Air Force for quite a while. And just had, wasn't around enough to like teach me the ins and outs. Not that, he has a whole lot of experience anyway. He knows the basics here and there. I think because my grandpa, it was just a generational thing. He passed on the knowledge. But it was really kind of something that nobody in my family kind of expected or was aware of. It was kind of something I trailblazed myself, for sure.
Interesting. I love that. I find it really fascinating because I feel like the women who I speak to, it's one extreme or the other, right? It is either it was in my family, my dad did it, my brother did it, my cousins did it, like everybody in my life did it, or it's totally out of left field, this like random thing. It just makes me giggle. There's no in between. So your parents were supportive, but they were initially wanting you to go to college. Was there any like hesitation to their coming around and supporting you, or was it like right off the bat?
No, I was pretty stubborn and independent all throughout my teenage years. So I made it very clear to them very early on that college was not in the cards for me, that I wanted to be a mechanic, an automotive technician. So I think the first opportunity I had to take an automotive class my sophomore year, I dropped out of band without telling my mom, and she got grumpy. But ultimately when, my dad was like, just something practical, she'll probably use mechanics and probably won't play saxophone for the rest of her life. And
very fair point.
That is what happened.
That is a fantastic point. That is wise wisdom right there. Sage advice. I love it. Okay. So do you mind me asking, like, what era was this in time? I don't know how old you are.
Yeah, so I'm 34. I was born in 90 on the dot. So I graduated 2008. At the time, in the class that I had taken in high school, my junior year had got me out of high school 2 or 3 days a week and into the local community college, learning the basics, which was a whole new world for me, right? I had no idea kind of what was going on. But that ultimately, the whole point of that 2-year high school program was to get me an apprenticeship at a dealership, which there I met one other girl who actually had been in the same woman that had been in the same program as I had, that was working at the dealership that I was working on. So I did have one other woman I knew, but otherwise I didn't know anyone else, any other women that were, working on cars.
Yeah.
It was kind of before the, Facebook was around, but Instagram wasn't a thing. So, now I'm connected to a whole bunch of other women mechanics, and it's fucking great. But back then it was not a thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Although you're lucky that you met one as early on as you did. That's pretty cool. I think it was a good like 7 years before I met another female technician. I saw an article written about another female technician.
Oh, really?
Prior to that. Yeah, my mom clipped it for me because it was like, I found this article. It's about another person like you.
There's another one. You exist.
Yeah, exactly. And it was huge. Like, it was a huge thing for me. In fact, her archive episode is going to be in 2 weeks. It's going to be released.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, kind of cool. But all right. So this is an interesting program that you went through. I'm curious to hear more about it because there's all sorts of different trades programs. And I think we hear talk a lot about how like they took automotive and trades classes out of the high schools and how bad that is. And that's definitely, I totally agree. It is horrible that we've taken trade schools out or trade classes out of the high schools. However, it's interesting how many other types of programs have come up in their stead and like ways to still offer these classes, albeit not like as easily as like just going to a class down the hall. There's like, in Phoenix, we have these like kind of regional areas where like kids can spend half of their day in their main school and then half of their day doing CTE. New York has like BOCES and that kind of stuff. So there's all these like different types of programs, but I've not heard of your program specifically, that kind of idea where you go to a college for part of the day?
So,
Talk to me about it.
yeah, so it was a community college. I believe the program was the AYES program.
Oh, I've heard of that, actually.
Yeah, so it was because I lived in Nebraska at the time. It was college wasn't as pushed, but I definitely had an initiative to find something automotive. So it wasn't offered at the high school, but it was kind of like an elective type of thing where they had an agreement with the local community college where you could get out if as a senior or a junior, you could get out of classes if you had, whatever credits already, and then you could get credits for a high school. So it actually it was towards like an associate's in automotive. So I actually got credits as a high school student that went towards this automotive associate's degree.
Interesting. Did it count towards your high school requirements to graduate as well?
Or I think so. I don't remember the specifics of it. It's been so long, but it didn't, I think you had to have certain grades and certain things done, but yeah, it definitely, it didn't, hold me back from graduating or anything at all.
Yeah. Interesting. That's fascinating. I find all these interesting programs, like it's really cool to see that there is some sort of creative problem solving that happens. And I mean, the reality is part of the problem, obviously, is that programs have been cut. But then we also, as much as we have a shortage of technicians in this country, we even more so have a shortage of shop class instructors because there's nobody wants to do this anymore. So they can't find the teachers to do the programs. They don't have the funding for the programs. So for a multitude of reasons, they go away. And it's cool that things are coming up in their stead, but it also kind of means that you had to really want it to seek this out and make this happen. And that is a shame, right?
It is. And it's actually, it's a shame that it was that way, back when I took it, almost 15 years ago now, but I actually was back in Nebraska visiting friends and family about a week ago. And one of my old coworkers from the dealership is actually teaching at that same community college now. And they have, at least for this program at the Metropolitan Community College in Omaha, they have revamped the whole building. They've actually built a whole new building for auto body work and general automotive tech. And he gave me a big tour of it. And it was actually really cool to see because it was the program, like you said, was very underfunded, rudimentary, very, kind of like you said, you had to kind of really seek it out. But at least it looks like, based off what I saw last week, they're understanding that it's a high demand, whether it's body work or, automotive mechanic work in general. They're in demand trades and they're at least getting the attention they need, at least in that specific area, which was really, really cool to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. That is fantastic to hear. Things are changing slowly, but things are changing. It always has to be like a pendulum swing, right? Like the cycle has to go through its paces where it's like everybody's like college. Oh wait, crap. We have nobody to do all of the stuff that makes the world run.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, we should maybe do something different here. So maybe the pendulum has started to swing. All right. So you go to this program, you get your apprenticeship. What was that experience like, getting your first opportunity and finding that first opportunity?
It was exciting and terrifying because, you can only learn so much in a class, in a classroom in school. We had cars to work on and I got really good at sorting bolts and taking things apart. But as far as, diagnosing, putting things back together, that's a whole other monstrosity. So the apprenticeship, so the second year of the high school class I took, the whole goal was to get an apprenticeship so that instead of coming into the classroom as often, you were going to a dealership a couple times a week. And that was the big point of the program, was to be working at a dealership.
Okay.
And
because that's where they got their funding, most likely, right? From
I think
industry.
Potentially, but I think it was a lot of the initiative of my actual instructor, my professor. He went to all the service managers of all of the dealerships and had a relationship with them. And then every year he'd come with a binder of all of our, like, he would take these headshots in front of with us and actually be like, this is what this person, these are the makes and models, or these are the manufacturers this student is interested in. Would you consider hiring them? Or this is their strengths, or this is specifically. So I think a lot of it was really his initiative. So shout out to Daryl Bush. He's been a huge fan and supporter of mine from the very beginning.
Huge shout out to him. That sounds like what amazing initiative. Like,
yes. Yeah.
Phenomenal instructors are so few and so far between, and so often don't get the thank and the praise that they deserve. So thank you for that. That is awesome. If you're listening or you see this ever, we need more of you. That's really cool.
Yeah, he was great.
Very cool. Teachers make all the difference in the world, guys. So, all right. So this was still in high school then. So your senior year of high school.
Yeah.
So
it
an
was
apprentice
my
at a
senior
dealership.
year, 18, 19, I got this job, and I was working at a Chevy dealership in Omaha, and I think I ported cars for a month or two. I changed oil for maybe 3 to 4. Okay. And maybe it was a little bit longer that maybe it was closer to 6, all said and done. And then I got I was officially an apprentice. So I had a single stall next to, one of the master technicians there, this guy, Troy. So who is a phenomenal human being and mechanic, and was super, super awesome at electrical and diagnosis, which a lot of people, at least in that dealership, were not super well versed in. So I accredit kind of not just my, me, that first, I learned more, I think in that 6 to 8 months I worked underneath of him than I did the previous, 2 years. And then, probably the next 5 years after that, working under him with diagnosis and electrical. And the electrical was huge. It wasn't, because we started, actually the Chevy Volt came out while I was working at the dealership, and the hybrid. So there were all these recalls and everybody was all scared of them. So it was my mentor. I was doing some of the hybrid recalls and one other guy that were the only ones that were allowed to touch them, and just demystifying how to properly diagnose and how to do electrical work. Helped me as an engineer and to eventually work on as a mechanic and a data engineer on the race team, because it wasn't scary, because I understood how electrical circuits worked with computers and all that. So it was really, that apprenticeship was really what helped me, like, okay, this is what I like to do. Gave me that foundation of knowledge to build from, and the confidence in myself, that I could, as long as I was hardworking and I had somebody to help me, it would be, anything was able to be figured out.
Amen. Say it louder for the folks in the back, right? Like with the right confidence building, right? Like when your self-esteem is built up, when you're given opportunity, when you have people who are willing to support you, anything is possible. Like, that's it. Huge. Right there. Perfectly said. I love, and that you had like such a picture perfect, like entrance into the industry. Like, I think that's what we dream about for men and for women, right? Is like to be able to be exposed early, get into the programs, get like into an apprenticeship, get a great mentor. It doesn't always happen that way, but I'm so glad that it happened for you.
Very aware. I know that that the road into being a mechanic and things like that is much different for a lot of other technicians, and women especially.
Yeah. But I think it's great affirmation for those that are working on these kinds of programs to create that pathway for young techs, to hear like when it works the way it's supposed to, it really works. Yes. It really does.
Absolutely.
And I also love that you are another example. Now I have a handful of women in the industry who kind of took the opportunity to learn electrical diagnostics and learn on hybrids and learn on electrical vehicles when everybody else was scared of them, and then how many doors that opened for them. And I love that you drew that to what you started doing in motorsport, because I think people tend to think that the dealership path and the motorsport path are very, very different paths, but there's obviously still a huge connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say that is probably what helped get me on the race team and secure my spot was they looked at my resume and saw that I had I've worked at mom and pop shops since then and things like that. But, I had worked at a dealership for, before, even though it was, I think it was maybe not more than 5 years at the dealership. It was enough to be like, okay, so you can work at a higher level.
And a crazy high pace, right? Because that's the dealership world.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
So you spent 4 or 5 years at the dealership. Was it the same dealership that you had your apprenticeship, or did you move to a different one?
Yep. Nope. It was. I stayed
Nice.
at the Chevy dealership for like 4 or 5 years. And at that point, kind of decided that I may not want to be in Nebraska full time. And
Okay.
at that point I had kind of, I had topped out, I would say, at the dealership. I was rebuilding engines. I was pulling transmissions. But they had one guy there that was the transmission guy. And so that was kind of like, oh, that would be cool. I'd like to learn that. But he was kind of the go-to and I don't think he was really, I didn't push very hard, but he already had somebody that was working under him. So there wasn't really room for another apprentice. So I kind of topped out at the dealership, and my nature is, okay, so what's the next level? What is my next accomplishment? How am I going to be leveling up or learning more? So kind of when I topped out at the dealership and was kind of getting itchy about Nebraska, I actually lived in a van for 2 years and traveled coast to coast in various trucks and RVs.
Oh my gosh.
Before I round up in North Carolina, because I love the mountains, but because also at that point I realized I did want to go to school for mechanical engineering, and the goal was to be able to design the cars I had been working on, because I really liked rebuilding engines. It was like one of my favorite things to do at the dealership.
Okay.
And then North Carolina, once you get in-state tuition, has really good engineering schools.
Oh, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's partly why you wound up in North Carolina, or okay.
Yep, and the mountains. The mountains are definitely home. Nebraska doesn't have very many.
Fair enough. So van life for 2 years. Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Were you working at the time? Well?
Odd jobs here and there. I worked
Okay.
on a couple pot farms out in California for the season, and then had money saved up, and would kind of come back to Nebraska, because having, the home base that I had there, I've got friends that are mechanics that run their own shop. So if I needed to pick up work, I could always do that. So mostly not working though.
Okay. So was this, I'm so curious, was this like I need a break, I'm burnt out, it's time to go year of adventure and finding yourself, or like what precipitated that?
I'm a big hippie at heart, so it was kind of inevitable for me. The fact that I stayed at that dealership for as long as I did when I was that age was kind of an amazing feat as it was. It kind of was as a long time coming.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean,
It was just time to get adventure.
I will say that, being a mechanic also helped me not have the fear of breaking down. It was huge, because I could drive an old, I drove, I think it was like an old 90s Honda minivan. And then there was 2 different campers. And so it was fine.
I love it. I love it. That's so cool. As a big hippie at heart as well, I am also amazed that I have stayed put as long as I have. And when this whole schooly trend came about,
Yeah, that's a big one.
I was, oh my gosh, I had such wanderlust and envy, and I want to build a school bus. I want to go ride around it.
There's some pretty cool builds out there.
There really are. I have not actually indulged in that quite yet, but I feel like it's only a matter of time.
I was gonna say it's never too late.
It never is. I love this. So, okay, God, so many questions. We're gonna keep focused though. All right, so you land in North Carolina.
Yes.
You decide now is the time to put down some roots again and go back to school and take things to the next level. Talk to me about what made you make that decision, because it's different, right? I know you topped out at the dealership, but there's a jump between saying I topped out in this place and I want to go do other things and maybe find other opportunities to go. And I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to become an engineer, which is like a totally different career path in a lot of ways, but not
For sure.
at the same time.
Yeah, I think it was my next challenge. I was, landing in North Carolina. When I finally got done traveling, I was kind of in a difficult place of my life, and so I needed something to focus on, and that's kind of what got me through that hard time, was being able to have something just consume my all of my time, all my energy. So I actually, being as stubborn as I was, my parents were like, "Oh, you want to go to school? Like, let us help you." And I decided to live in a van while I was going to school. So I did that, and it was, because I always, making that jump was a big one for sure. I I think it was, I wanted my next challenge. I really wanted to be able to design the engines I was working on, and I figured it would help me kind of take my thirst for knowledge and understanding these cars that I love so much to the next level. I think was the big part of it.
Okay.
And I do remember we would have. I remember having I think it was an engineer from GM come to the dealership. And I was rebuilding a Malibu engine that had a funny noise on start that they couldn't duplicate on anything else. And the engineer came and just pointed at things while I was tearing apart the engine. And I was like, "That's kind of cool. Like, how do you get that job? I love the hands-on work, which is why I got into being a mechanic. But I was like, he knows all the ins and outs and is like, okay, if it's not this, it could be this. And if it's not that, because I got very into the documentation and the diagnostic procedures of the electrical work, so I could flag my hours, because when you're new, you get all the warranty work, but you can get paid for all of your warranty diagnosis time if you punch in, punch out, and you diagnose and you say everything you had to do. So I was like, oh, well, I don't know why everyone's bitching about it. I'll just do all the electrical diagnosis that nobody else wants to do, document it, and get paid all of my hours. So having that documentation, but then going to, the GM portal and going, okay, if it's not this, then you do this. And if it's not that, then you do that. I'm like, where does that come from? I want to be on the front side of that. So I think that's really a lot of where the jump from mechanic to engineer came into play.
That makes so much sense. Fantastic explanation. And I totally get it. Yeah. Very cool. I'm curious because I feel like there's still a perception societally of like, the tradesperson as like the lowly folks of the world, and engineers have a little more esteem. It sounds a little nicer. Have you found a large difference in how people receive you, how people talk to you, how like you're experienced since you became an engineer?
For sure. I would definitely say that, having been, when I was a mechanic, I used to tell people I work at a Chevy dealership. They're like, "Oh, you work front desk." I'm like, "No, I'm a mechanic." So that was always oh. Yeah. And so when people ask what I do, I by default will still say I'm a mechanic by trade, because even though I've not been employed as a mechanic since the race team and haven't worked in a proper shop in even probably closer to almost 7 or 8, maybe 10 years by now, I still consider myself a mechanic first. And then I, usually go engineer, got more recently an engineer, but there's definitely a difference. It's just the standard. People are always curious because every industry I've worked in is male dominated. So it's always a little like, oh, how did you do that? How'd you get into that? But it's just kind of inevitable. The engineer is like you said, it's more esteemed. It carries a little more oomph in today's society, unfortunately.
Which makes me love it even more that you still introduce yourself first as a mechanic.
Yeah. Yep.
I love
That's where my heart is for sure.
Yeah. So tell me about this race team.
So the race team. So was finally coming to the end of my, I think it took me 3.5, 4 years to get the degree standard, but I was working, I was doing festivals in the summer for my sanity so that I could get my travel in, because my big three things are live music, cars, and traveling. And if I can figure out how to get paid for 2 of those at the same time, I'm usually pretty happy. So I spent a couple years working festivals and live music events in the summer while I was getting my degree, just to kind of have my sanity. And then as I came up on graduation, I was like, oh crap, I'm what am I going to do with this thing? Like, I haven't even thought about it. I thought I was going to do another summer in music, live music. And then I was like, no. And everybody I had been going to school with was like people. So people come to the school I went to, Charlotte in North Carolina, the UNC Charlotte, for motorsports. They have a motorsports concentration, which I ended up getting because I like working on cars. And when I walked into the Kulwicki lab, they were like, oh, you actually know what you're doing. And all these other kids wanted to be mechanics, so their parents told them to become a mechanical engineer, which is still bad. It baffles me that people do that, but it's a thing. So I ended up getting the motorsports concentration, and all my friends were like, well, you should work on a race team because then it lines up my cars and traveling. I was like, this would be cool for a while. So I kind of hit boots to the ground, made a list of all the NASCAR, the Monster teams, the Xfinity teams, and then started just doing research and homework. Started listening to racing podcasts, and I was actually listening to another podcast called Dinner with Racers, and they interviewed this guy, Bill Riley, and he said his shop was in Morrisville, North Carolina. I'm like, oh, that's where all the race teams are. I've been going up there to, anywhere I could find an address, I'd go in person. But a lot of race teams don't have addresses. So I'd cold email. I started cold emailing. So that I found out about Riley Motorsports and Technologies through this podcast, sent a cold email. I actually ended up it was 3 months later, I got an email back coming up on graduation, and they asked for a resume. I went in for what I thought was going to be an interview, and they basically gave me a job.
Nice.
Yeah. So I worked as a carbon fiber tech and a mechanic at first. And after a couple years doing that, after I think it was 1.5 years doing that, they started training me as a DAG, or a data engineer, which is responsible for all of the electrical components on the race car. So wiring harnesses, any what would be considered aftermarket. So in-car cams, like radios, so that we can talk to the drivers. So a DAG is responsible for all things electric, hooks the computer up to the car's computer, pulls all the data, and makes sure all the squiggly lines are doing what they're supposed to.
Amazing explanation. I like it. This is
relevant,
right? No, this is great foreshadowing, guys, for the fact that she teaches people about car maintenance. So this is what's coming soon: is that she has a knack for explaining complicated things in simple ways. So that is very interesting, and I appreciate that you kind of shared that whole story of how you pursued that job placement, because I think that's, especially with race stuff, right? I think people really struggle with how the heck do you break into that? How do you get that first job? If you had to guess, like how many cold emails, cold calls, randomly driving up to their address?
I mean, I definitely drove up to 10 to 15 different random addresses. That was as many as I could find.
Okay.
I cold emailed probably around 30 to 40 teams, just whatever email I could find, for for sure. I had that offer, and then I had 2 other interviews, and one of them did end up offering me an apprenticeship at a NASCAR team. But because I went to school later, I was 29 when I graduated, and I was living in a camper, and the apprenticeship wanted to pay me $15, maybe $15 an hour. It's one of those. Unfortunately, the thing with NASCAR especially is it's in high. There's a lot of people that want to do it, and there's not a lot of positions. So there's still the attitude and mentality of, well, you're lucky to even be getting your foot in the door. So you kind of work for little to no pay, especially at the beginning. And I kind of it's like, hey, I get it, but I'm at the point where I'm leveling up. I realize this is a great opportunity, but this guy is going to pay me a livable wage. So I'm going to go over there.
Yeah, things change when you're not like fresh out of high school doing this, and you're a little bit further along in life. That makes sense. Yeah, totally. And supply and demand, right? I mean, that's why technicians' wages, I think, are finally starting to go up, right? Because they are in such high demand now. For the longest time, they were not very high.
And as they should be, though.
Yeah. Oh, God, absolutely. 100%. Shops need to be charging more, and technicians need to be paid more. 100%. Yeah. Okay, fascinating. So how long were you with the race team?
I was probably another solid 5 years.
Okay. That's your threshold before you go forward.
I guess so. Yeah. I've kind of got like a 5-year threshold. It may have been a little bit shorter. I think I was traveling full time, maybe 2.5 years.
Okay.
But the team I worked for was very unique because it was sports car racing. And I was on the road a lot because I wasn't just in one race series. The company and the team worked in multiple race series. So I wasn't just responsible for one race car. I was responsible for 2 race cars, but then also the backup cars just had to be race ready. And so it was a lot of work, and it's a very stressful industry. And I was having a lot of fun. I mean, I loved my boss. I loved the guy I worked for. I loved the guys I worked with. I mean, I still live down the street from a lot of them, like some of my best friends. But I actually became really close with my race engineer, this guy, Chris, and I saw how good he was at his job. And so as a data engineer, race engineer is the next level up. That's when you're doing strategy and you're telling the mechanics what to change on the car to make it handle better for the driver. And I saw how good Chris was at his job. And then I saw the guys I was working next to that wanted to do that same thing. And I saw how motivated and driven they were. And I was like, I don't care that much. And then that's not an industry that you can half-ass it and you can just kind of skim by. As soon as I started having that feeling, it became abundantly clear that I needed to pivot really hard. And so I finished out the race season because I don't ever want to leave in the middle of a race season. It's very difficult to find help in the middle of a race season. So I finished it out and was able to land a job where I'm working now, kind of like at the right time, right before the next season picked up. But I mean, I love it. I love racing. It's a lot of fun, but it is a very stressful, high-paced job as a mechanic and as somebody that has a mechanical engineering degree for not what a lot of mechanical engineers get paid. And it was what's my next level up. So.
Yeah, that was not what I expected you to say when you said that you were like watching this person saying like, what, he's the next level and how do I get to do that? But I love it, right? Because that's like if we look at your story, right? It was like you were you were a technician and you saw this engineer come in. And you're like, oh, how do I do that? And then I expected this to be a repeat of that story, that same theme. And you're like, no, record stop. That's not actually what I want at all. No. I love the self-awareness because it takes a lot to be able to say, stop, I don't want it enough. I could do it, right? Like you are totally capable. You could do it. I want it a little bit, maybe. I'm curious, it would be interesting, but I don't want it enough.
Yeah.
And
Nope, that's exactly
that's
it.
takes a lot.
Yep.
That's very cool.
Hmm.
So with your current position, what is your current position? Tell me what you're doing.
So I am a mechanical design engineer for Mack and Volvo semi trucks.
So cool.
I'm what
Total
they
pivot.
my official title is ETL, which is just some corporate jargon for engineering task leader. Essentially, what I do is I own several components on the Mack and Volvo semi trucks. So the highway trucks, the vocational, so the ones that are like the dump trucks doing construction. I own the same component across all those vehicles, and I'm responsible for taking it from a concept, which is just a surface that the artists at the company give me, to production. So I make it a 3D model. I talk to the people that have to make it, the suppliers. I talk to the quality people. I talk to, I basically like project manage this component. And mine specifically, it's called the side air intake. So it's not the grill that's on the front of the truck, but on the side of the truck, if there's a little air intake, and there's going to be one on the hood in the future, I own those components as well as any emblems or badges. So
Interesting.
yes,
That is
it's a mouthful.
fascinating. But a super cool mouthful. So that's really awesome. Is this closer? You think this is kind of more in line with like what you were originally kind of thinking when you were that tech out in the dealership seeing? I want to know who that designs that, right?
It's a lot closer. Yep. It's a lot closer. And it's not as in depth with the engines as I thought I would be, but it's a visible component on the truck, which is really cool because the guy that I work kind of like, he's my coworker, but he's been doing it for like 15 or 20 years. So I learned how to do my job from him. He's been designing the radiator grills on the Mack and Volvo trucks for 15 or 20 years. And he can see that every time he drives down the interstate. Like, that's really cool.
That is incredibly cool. I love it. So I guess that answers my question. Like, is it everything you hoped it would be?
Yeah, it's a challenging job. It's very busy, especially in the like point we're at with like these new trucks that are coming out. It's challenging in different ways than I expected. And I'm still, even though I've been there for 2.5 years, while I'm proficient at my job and I'm getting better at it, I'm still learning new things, which is important for me. I like to, what's the next level? What am I learning?
Yes, I've noticed that theme. Yes. So you said it was challenging in ways that you didn't expect. What was like, maybe if you can provide like an example, what was something that surprised you as far as challenges that you faced?
Well, for me, I had never worked a corporate job was the biggest one. I had always worked in a shop. I had always worked in a garage. So kind of almost dialing back my overt, strong-willed, like living in my masculine energy, which has been a very like strong habit of mine. I really have been able to dial that back, which is new for me. And so that was probably the biggest adjustment was, it's still a male dominated workforce, but I'm working with more women now than I ever have before, which is a great change. So that was a big one. But as far as challenges go, I just corporate, just getting used to the like sitting at a computer all day in front of a computer screen and not like physically running around a shop when I'm busy. Like I shut my computer at the end of the day and I'm like exhausted, but I'm also like looking around like, what the fuck did I do all day? Like I got stuff done, but there's no like physical car that's fixed. There's no like race checklist that has like been accomplished. It's just all in front of me. So I think that's the most challenging is I've had to find other outlets for my need to build. So now I have a motorcycle and a truck that I'm working on, and I've taken up carpentry and like I've built a deck. So it's just like I have to be working with my hands is a thing.
Absolutely, I can see that. So true. It is a different type of exhaustion. It really is. It's a
Mhm.
and I always find it interesting because like the folks that are dealerships, you see it, and in independent shops, you see it, and I think really anywhere where you have like the hands-on trades folks, and then you have the office folks that like are all crucial to
Yep.
getting the job done, right? Like we need
Mhm.
everybody, but like the folks working with their hands are like, you guys in your cushy office, sitting at your computer desk, like so nice. You're not even working that hard. And then you do it. You're like, oh God, this really is hard. It's just different hard.
It's different hard.
Yeah.
It
You're
is different
mentally exhausted by
hard.
the
Mhm.
end.
Yep.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, I love it. Very cool. I have a question from the audience that I'm going to bring on
Absolutely.
stage. I don't know if you know the answer to this or not. Can you share the significance of the gold Mack Bulldog hood ornament? Is that something that you can talk to us about?
Yeah, actually. So I own the Mack Bulldog. So I own it. It's mine. So
What?
I actually know about more about that Mack Bulldog than I ever thought I would. So it's technically mine. It hasn't changed in the history. I mean, it's changed once in the history of Mack. So the ownership of it has gotten passed along over the years. But the gold Bulldog is it used to be um, it used to be an all American powertrain, an all pure Mack power. So the engine, transmission, axle was all Mack because you can buy different axles and transmissions. And you can get a silver Bulldog, which means that, and I should know, but I don't. But means that the axle is not a Mack product; it's an import or something like that. So that's the significance of the gold Bulldog. That is potentially changing in the future, though. It may be what they consider a CMF, which is just a fancy word for trim level, meaning you can in the future buy the Mack Bulldog and not have the pure Mack powertrain, which is an atrocity to the tradition of what is Mack, the Bulldog, and that gold standard. And I've talked about it with my mentor, the guy that does the grills, because he owned it before me, and he's also not happy about it.
So you own it, so to speak, and yet you don't. People should not come at you when this changes. This is not you're up to you.
I,
This is
I did
up to
everything I
others.
could. I want it on record. I got the in our computer program that tracks all the variants and all of the
Uh-huh.
offerings for all the trucks. They said, "Hey, we need you to approve this because this is happening." And I go, "Daniel, does this sound right?" Who's the grill guy? And he goes, "No, don't do that. Don't approve that." So I didn't approve it. I didn't approve it, and then they went around me and had somebody else approve it.
Bummer. She tried, y'all. She tried.
I tried.
That's fascinating, though. What an interesting little.
Yes, it is. That's kind of funny that question
Yeah.
came up.
I love it. That's awesome. So now you're with them for how long now? How long have you been
I've been
with?
there for it'll be 3 years at the end of this year, so about 2.5-ish years.
Uh-oh.
Hmm.
Uh-oh.
I know. I know.
We're
It's
like
a ticking time bomb. We'll see.
halfway through your 5 year. So okay, so there's a chance that history will not repeat itself and you will have like found your joy here because this
Hmm.
was kind of a
A lot.
goal,
Yeah, it was a long
right?
time coming.
Yeah. However, like if you were to conjecture, like if there were a next step for you, even within Mac Volvo, like if there
Mhm.
what's the like the thing? Because knowing your story, even just a little bit that I do now, you're driven, you're gonna want the next step.
Mhm.
Do you have an idea of what that is yet?
I don't. So I'm
Okay.
still I think I'm still adjusting to corporate life, and I figured out a long time ago that half of figuring out what you want is sometimes figuring out what you don't want. Um so at this point I'm happy with my job. I'm content where it's taken me. When we hit that 5 year mark, we'll see kind of what's in the cards. But Volvo is a really good company to work for. They have it's a Swedish based company, so it's an EU based company. So they have they really do offer a lot of benefits, but then also they have even an initiative, and I don't know the specifics, but for promoting women to management positions and things like that. It's a very diverse workforce that I just, and even though I live in North Carolina, we have a lot of Swedish people. We have a lot of Brazilians. I mean, I work with a French guy, a guy from Russia. It's just it's a good place to work for sure.
That's awesome. I got to work with Volvo kind of for the first time during the last all-female build, and I have to say I was so impressed. And it's interesting to hear that it like carries over to the trucking side of things as well. I know they have their like gender neutrality initiative that they're trying to go for, and it's just very admirable. I definitely drank the Kool-Aid when I got to tour Volvo's headquarters. I was like, oh, maybe
Absolutely.
I want to work here.
It's a thing. It's a thing. And absolutely is. I speak I think very highly of Mack and Volvo. It's a great company to work for.
That's awesome to hear. Okay, I just looked at the time and we only have 10 minutes left. So it's very important that we touch on this other like huge part of who you are and what you do. What led you to kind of going down to you're still adjusting to corporate, you're adjusting to a new job, you're doing all of this new stuff, and in the middle of it, you're like, I'm going to start a whole new adventure and build this whole new little like side hobby business that is really doing phenomenal things in teaching women about their cars. What brought that on? Talk to me about that.
That was a long time coming. It is I've wanted to make a difference. I've had the idea that I wanted to, I had an epiphany when I was doing, the hippie travel thing, that I wanted to make a positive impact. I wanted to help change the world. And so I had been figuring out what that looks like for a long time. There was kind of two moments that made it click for me. One was when I was working up in Boone in the mountains of North Carolina at a mom and pop shop while I was starting to go to school. I was changing this woman's tire, a flat. She saw me through the office. It was kind of an open air shop. And she comes back to talk to me while I'm doing it. And she goes, "Oh, can I help you?" And I'm like, I mean, you're paying me, but sure. So I coached her, she put her spare back in her trunk, and I showed her how I was, plugging, patching the hole and, putting her tire back on. And she was like, "Oh man, thank you so much. Like, I feel so empowered. My dad taught me how to do these things, but then when I saw you doing it, I was like, why the heck aren't I back there doing that?" And like, it kind of clicked. I was like, oh, like it matters who you learn from, because I've always learned from men, which I've had great mentors and I've worked with terrible people, but I've never had a woman mentor. I've never learned from a woman. I've never had that opportunity. So that was kind of my first like, aha, oh, like I could teach women about cars. And then it's about 2 years ago, right after I started this job, I took a women's carpentry class at this place called Wild Abundance in the mountains of Asheville, which is a great place. They offer a lot of women's like hands-on carpentry. So I took a basic carpentry class. I ended up taking the advanced carpentry class, but in the basic women's carpentry class, I was like, oh, I could do this. Like, this is what it just was like, why aren't you already doing this? You've had this idea. Like, it kind of lit a fire under my ass. And I was like, I need to figure out what this looks like. So I think within a couple months, I had started putting out my newsletter. And I have, I try to do it every week. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks. But I was like, okay, like I want to I still am working to expand to in-person classes, but that's kind of, the newsletter grew into an online course and an Instagram account, because while I think the hands-on aspect is very important, you can learn so much online. And what I found when I was, just kind of looking around to see what there was for women to work on cars online, there's not a whole lot. If you know what specific thing you're trying to fix or look at on your specific car, it's on YouTube. I can almost fucking guarantee it. But that's not where women are starting from. It's a wealth of information for me trying to figure out how to replace the tailgate handle on my 85K Blazer that nobody knows has pictures of the diagrams for, right? But like for a woman, she doesn't know what an air filter is for her engine or the cabin. So, right. So that's where the online thing was birthed. It's a bunch of, it's the foundation. And as I was creating this course, I was like, oh, that's where I got my confidence from, was an insecure 18-year-old girl that over the last 10 years has become a woman working with my hands and gaining this skill. And so I really wanted to capitalize and really emphasize and like compound that natural confidence that comes when you learn something new and you do something for the first time, because it's all about pushing outside of your boundaries and doing what's uncomfortable enough times so that it's comfortable, and then figuring out what that next uncomfortable thing is. So the online course it's a women's car care, but it's also confidence. And so once I had done that, I was like, okay, but how do I like reach people? Like, how do I reach the women I'm trying? So then the next step was the Instagram thing. So that is how all of that came about.
Fantastic. I could not agree with you more. Like every single thing that you said, 100%. It was the same experience for me. Is like that. Once I realized that cars weren't as scary as I thought they were, it gave me so much confidence to do all of the things in my life that I've done. And I just want to share that with other women. And I love that you bring up this idea of like, it matters who you learn from, and that you're clear. And I want people to hear this. Like, it's not saying, like, she's not saying, I'm not saying, Lord knows, that like men are bad teachers, because men can be wonderful teachers, but there is something, it hits different, right?
Yes.
Like it hits different when you are a woman and there is a woman explaining it to you. Yep. I don't know about you, I've had so many women in my basic car care classes that I teach that have said, my dad was a mechanic and he tried to explain this stuff to me, but it never clicked until you said it.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And it's not because I said it any better than dad did. It's just they're hearing it different because I'm not dad.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah. And sometimes when you're in those situations, it's oh no, this makes sense, right? And you're like, yeah, it makes sense. I got it.
Yeah.
And you don't.
Right. Right. Exactly. I love it. I love what you're doing. Tell folks where they can find you and where they can get signed up for this newsletter that you've got and your online classes. Like, plug yourself. Tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram right now. I have not ventured over to the TikTok yet. It's a matter of time, but I'm doing, one thing at a time right now. So I'm at Meg Drives Confidence. I have links for my newsletters in the bio. You get signed up and you'll get a free download guide that has pictures and step-by-step instructions of 3 things every woman should be able to check on her car. The biggest one, tires, tread, pressure, but also how to check your oil. And checking your oil, ladies, is like the biggest game changer. You learn how to do that, and the next time you go look at a used car, you shift that power dynamic. That used to be my favorite pastime when I first started working on cars, was going used car shopping with my girlfriends. And they would just say, they'll look on the men's faces when you pop that hood and you pulled that dipstick. They're like, oh shit.
Yeah, it is so much fun seeing how they change how they talk to you, because they don't expect women to know or care.
Yes.
Like I love when they don't even talk about the engine at all, and I'm like, hi, so which engine does this car come in? Like, is it the V6 or the 4-cylinder? And they're like, wait, what? Let me tell you about the seat leather. And I'm like, no. That's not what we're here for.
Yes. Exactly.
I love it. Folks, if you have not encountered this incredible human being before, definitely make sure you go check out her links. Her education is spot on. It really is wonderful. And it's so great seeing that there's more of us out there doing this kind of stuff, because it is needed, right? Like there's people here and there doing basic car care classes and doing stuff online. And to your point, there's tons of folks on YouTube that are sharing like all of the really in-depth information. And there's a handful of folks who are sharing that like back to basics kind of stuff. But it's intimidating, and our industry is not really one that has been known for being like, hey, come on in, learn all the things. Right. No, we like to make fun of people who don't know things, right? Like that's what our industry is about. So I applaud what you're doing. I think you're fantastic. She's got a great way of explaining things. I've got one final question, but we're going to go over time a few moments. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely. That sounds wonderful.
Okay, awesome. I like to be respectful of people's time. So, my final question that I always like to ask is, if you could go back in time and speak to little baby Meg, a younger version of you, or another little girl out there like you, who's watching this right now and going, "Oh my gosh, she's so cool! I want to be like her." What are your words of advice to this little girl?
I would say the biggest thing that I would tell my younger self, or another woman or girl trying to get into this, is, and this I guess could also just be life in general, is just don't forget the big picture. It's super easy to get caught up in a situation at work, or a person, or a bad experience, but like, it's so important to be able to take the time and to be able to take a step back and say, how is this situation going to impact me a year from now? Is this decision going to matter 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And if it does, act or decide accordingly, I think would have been wonderful to hear as an 18-year-old or 21-year-old in the trade, for sure.
That is phenomenal advice. I love that. I love that. Okay, and I lied. There's one more question.
Absolutely.
What do your knuckles say?
Oh, my knuckles? Grateful. I don't know if it's going to show up.
It does, indeed.
Way.
It is perfect. I love it. I love it. You are fantastic. This was amazing. I've loved learning about you and your journey. I'm so grateful you said yes when I
thank you for having me.
Slid into your DMs. We definitely have to stay in touch more offline, because
absolutely,
who knows? Maybe there's some collabs in the future.
Absolutely, I hope so.
Yes, definitely. All right. So thank you so much. And folks at home, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed meeting Meg as much as I did. Make sure you go check her out. All the links are going to be down below. She really does put out some phenomenal content. And we definitely just want to support other women doing amazing things in this space. Thank you for spending part of your evening with us. Make sure you come back next week. Every Wednesday night, we meet another incredible tradeswoman. And of course, every Monday night, we release an archive episode. So make sure you tune in. 2 times a week, you get to meet awesome tradeswomen to be inspired by and empowered by and laugh and cry and all of the rest of the good things. And of course, a big thank you to our sponsor for this series, for this episode. Thank you to DriveTime for all of their support, both through what they do with their business and what they do here supporting Girl Gang Garage and the With Her Two Hands series. We appreciate their support of women in the trades. And with that, I'm going to bid you guys a good night. Until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to one another, be good human beings, and we'll see you next time.